You're listening to One Family, What's God Doing? Where we explore what God's doing in YWAM locations throughout Virginia. We can't wait for you to find out what God's doing today.
Welcome back to What's God Doing? And I'm excited because I have a friend of mine and fellow YWAMer here to share stories that you might not have heard otherwise. And so I say we just jump right in. You know, your stories pertain to an experience you had recently. So where did you go and how did you see God moving?
Yeah, it's really an amazing story of how God used me and used so many other people. But let me tell you what happened first. There's a family from Brazil, and I will call them the Lee family. And they came in 2016 to our YWAM base in Richmond because God specifically told them to learn English and go to China in that order. And so they came with their family of 5. They were here for 3 years, and they became like a second family to me. And they were just excellent students. They left and they went to China for 5 years. They were here not too long ago, sometime last year. And when they were here, he invited me to come and teach English. I've been teaching English since around 2010. So he wanted me to come teach English in China, but specifically he wanted me to teach English in the secret underground school. It was a Christian school that's obviously not allowed by the current government. And I kind of blew him off. You know, I kind of thought, oh, he was just kind of saying to come visit. And I didn't think anything much more about it, and I wasn't hearing from him. And that was like in March of last year, I think, when he mentioned it. And it went all the way until June, when I just kept getting nagged in my spirit by this offer. And I was talking to a good friend one weekend, and I said, you know, this and that. And she said, well, what would it take for you to pull the trigger, for you to actually say yes? And I said, oh, God would have to talk to me himself or skywrite it or something, right? Mm-hmm. And so on Sunday of that weekend, I went to church and I was just minding my own business. I think I was just watching a guest choir we had or something on stage. I remember it was Father's Day weekend. And all of a sudden, and I mean all of a sudden, there was like this whoosh, and I knew that God's presence was right there. And I knew he was speaking to me in a way that I've only heard once before. Wow. And he said, are you willing? And doggone it, I knew he meant China. I knew that's what he was talking about. And so I said, oh, but God, what about blah, 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 blah. And he said, are you willing? And I said, but God, I've got the English program here I'm so involved with, and this and that and the other. And he said a third time, are you willing? Well, most days if you're a parent and you tell a kid, and by the third time you're telling the kid, you kind of got the attitude to go with the tone. And he didn't change. He just continued in that same tone, are you willing? And after that third time, I went, okay, yeah. All right, God, yes, I'm willing. And then he said something so important that I saw played out over and over again. He said, I'll take care of the details. That's exactly what he said. And he did that in crazy, fantastic ways. So fast forward to this past January, February, something like that, when I went to China. And just the stories that come out of that, I'm just trying to narrow down in my mind which story I'm going to tell you. But I think the one that impacts me the most is after my first week of teaching 13 students in this underground Christian group of students, and actually they are teachers in the underground school, but they were needing some assistance. And so in the evening, after their school hours, they were gathered together in this one room. And after the first week, Paul, I was frustrated. I was in over my head. I did not know how to facilitate this group of teachers because for all these years, for like 15, 14 years or something, however long I've been doing this, I've never taught anything except beginners. And they were not beginners. They're intermediates and advanced, and maybe a couple beginners sprinkled in, but I really didn't know how to do what it seemed like they needed to have done. And so I was speaking with the Lee family, and I said, I just don't know how to do this. I'm not the person. And Paul, how many times have we found ourselves in that situation? Feeling like God asked us to do something, but we're like, I don't know how to do it. And that's definitely where I was. So sitting around the breakfast table that morning, coffee and tea, and going, I'm sorry, I'm just not that person, and I don't know how to do this. And she said to me, do you remember that you told the students that you were going to teach some conversation? I'm like, yeah. And I'm going to do that because that's what you said they needed, and that's what they said they needed was conversation. And she said, well, teach conversation. Okay, Paul, that sounds really easy. And I'm like, how do you teach conversation? In my experience, we do everything, reading, writing, grammar, talking. I mean, the whole thing, right? But I haven't honed in on conversation. And I told her, I said, I just don't really know how to do that. And she said, when the students are speaking to you, do you understand them? But it's just kind of, we call it grammangled. And I'm like, yeah, I basically know what they're saying. I just, it's not perfect. And she says, well, that's enough. Just hone in on that. And I'm like, okay. I said, but I don't know how to do this. And then all of a sudden, this is my second all of a sudden, I got this idea in my head. And I had this word, and it was debate. Debate. Now, I've never watched a live debate. I've never seen a debate. I've never been involved in any way in a debate. I know that one of the English teachers on our campus, she has done debates with her advanced class, but as I was the beginner teacher, we've not done that. So I went to Google and I looked up some basic debate rules, and I went to class that night and I said, okay, guys, we're going to do things a little differently. So this half of the class, you're going to debate that a paperback book is better than an electronic. And this half, you're going to do the opposite. Now, it doesn't matter which way you really feel. This is what your assignment is, and you need to find a way to prove that your side is right. It was completely amazing. So each of the students on each team had 2 minutes to give their side of things, and went back and forth, one person on one side, then one on the other, and they went back and forth, each person with 2 minutes. And then I gave them a 2-minute break so that they could kind of round up the troops and figure out, their last strategy for their last person. And then the final person was going to stand up and give their last hurrah. And it was crazy fantastic. I mean, the students had such a good time. I remember the matriarch of the group, and it was mostly women. We had 2 men out of the 13. And the matriarch was the anchor person for her team. And I remember that when it was time for her, she stood up and she banged on the table, and she was very animated and doing this and that. And when her 2 minutes were finished, she sat down and she said, did I just do that? Was that me? Was this so out of context and out of character for her? When it was all said and done, I talked to the students about how they felt about that particular exercise. And they said, oh my goodness. They said, we had 2 minutes, and we knew you had the timer, and you were being really serious with that timer, like, time to sit down. Mm-hmm. And they said, we suddenly realized that we had to speak without writing it out first. We couldn't think about what grammar rule. We couldn't think about what tense of the verb. We couldn't think about what was the right preposition. We just had to speak. And it was great. It was freeing. We were able to do it, and we didn't know we could do it. How cool is that, Paul? How cool is that God gave me exactly the right thing that freed them to do that? And then we even had some that were really the beginners that said, I've never had 2 minutes in all my life that I've spoken English. I didn't know I could do it. So it was just really a freeing thing for them to be able to do. They marked it as like one of their highlights of their time in that English class with me. I don't think it was until I came back here to the United States that I had the revelation that really debating is not a part of their culture at all. They're very accustomed to being told, do this, and they do it. They don't do it like, like, oh, I have to do this. It's just so normal to them. So to be given the freedom to say no and to think outside the box was just something brand new for them. But what happened even after that, in the days to come, I call it my manna in China. Most of us are familiar with the stories of the manna in the desert that God provided the Israelites. And how much manna was it? It was one per day, except for Friday for the weekend, right? But typically it was one serving of manna, one time a day that you got manna. And that's what happened, is that was, God dropped debate on me for that day. But then the next day, he gave me a brand new idea. And the next day, another brand new idea. And usually they were things that I've never thought of, never done before, never seen before. Or maybe it was something that I had, but it was like with a new twist. And it just took so much weight off my shoulders. I was no longer going, okay, what am I going to do with this class? What are we going to do with this time? And I was able to tell the students, hey, I don't know what we're going to do tomorrow because God's going to show me. And they're like, what? I said, yeah, God's going to tell me. And they're like, wait, he talks to you like that? He just talks to you? I'm like, yeah, he really, really does. And so they were able to see that. And they're like, that's so cool. What's God going to do tomorrow? And I said, I don't know. Let's find out. And so every day I was able to see this manna come down from God. And I think it was better for me than for them because my faith grew so much to see exactly what he was saying. And then from that, I was able to see exactly what he wanted them to do, how he wanted them to grow, because he knew the things that they needed. And so what a blessing to be a part of that. What a blessing to watch God move in that way. So yeah, that was probably the thing that impacted me the most.
Yeah. When I love that message of God giving an invitation, but then saying, are you willing? Because your logic wasn't wrong. Underground ministry can be dangerous, can be frightening, can be risky.
Right.
And you had legitimate reasons to say no. You did say no initially,
right,
until God gently prompted. And then it's interesting, you get there after telling God, okay, I'm willing, and things are hard. And the enemy could say, well, see, you were right the first time. You shouldn't have done it. But when God invites us to be willing, and then we continue to be willing, he shows up, he works. And so how would you encourage somebody who is in that space of God giving an invitation? They have legitimate reasons to say no, and God's whispering, are you willing? How would you encourage somebody to be positioned to become willing?
Do it scared.
I love it.
Just do it scared. And also surround yourself with a few people. I'm not talking about lots, just a few people who have faithfully walked with you, and ask them to be in prayer with you. So I had 2 people here on the ground that I specifically went to and said, would you commit every day? I'm not asking for an hour, even just a minute. Would you commit every day to praying for me? And I know that they did. But there were also lots and lots of others, people that I know and lots of people that I don't know. But Paul, something else comes to mind. I also realized that God didn't say, go. He said, are you willing? It was very gentlemanlike, It was, and that's what I find. That's one of the characteristics of God that I often see, is that he just asks, he's very gentlemanlike. And I realized that I had the option of no. I could have said, Paul, I could have said no, and he would have still loved me. He wouldn't have loved me any less if I had said no. He would have said, okay, daughter, okay, I still love you. I've got other things planned for you. This is not the end of the road. You're not finished. You're not washed up. I'm not going to make bad things happen to you because of it. But he would have given that opportunity to someone else, I think, because he had the plans for those wonderful, lovely people in China that I now dearly love and I'm still in contact with. But he would have sent someone else, but I would have missed out.
Yeah.
I would have missed out on seeing and learning so many things and growth for myself. But I love knowing that I can't do anything to change his love for me. And that's so reassuring.
Yeah. That's good. Well, as we close out, is there a verse that God's been putting on your heart or that was relevant in this whole journey?
You know, there's a bunch of verses that talk about his right hand. So the verse that comes to mind would be Isaiah 41:10. This says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." And I can remember sometimes even taking like prayer walks around the area and going, okay, God, here's my right hand. So that's the one that sticks out.
Well, thank you so much for, one, being willing and accepting God's invitation and going, because God worked through you to meet people where they were in a space that it's very easy for people to not be willing to go, but also for being willing to share, because sharing these stories is difficult for many reasons. And so I'm grateful for your willingness. So thank you. And thank all of you for listening and for journeying with us as we together as one family explore what it means to know God and make him known.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of One Family, What's God Doing? If you'd like to learn more about what God's doing in Virginia, visit us at ywamva.org and join us next week for more stories of God at work.